there was some thorniness clearly behind the scenes with Gary in Portland this season and in his comeback.
Later, let's start with Mr. Gary Payton II. When this deal, 4-team trade, first goes down for the Warriors' purposes, you get a familiar face back in the building, a guy who was an absolute dog defensively, who did some really good things in the playoff run last year, hit open threes, was a plus impact player for them. And as you know really well, we've written on this and talked about this. I think even a more nuanced benefit and value to Gary coming back, because you sent that message to the old heads, the Stephs and the Draymonds and the Clays, that, we are still focusing on the present, trying to give you help right now. So that was a lot of their motive. And then, they part ways with James Wiseman going to Detroit, and that deal, get off some tax money in the process. And it seemed like that was the way to go. Pick it up from there. I mean, we know how this thing is unraveled, but tell us.
Yeah. So, I mean, they get him in the building. Let me do my math here. Friday morning, and take him through a physical, and the physical reveals to them that Gary Payton's going to be out a while. That their medical team came to the conclusion that, it has to do with the adductor and the core. And it goes back obviously to the summer when, I believe in July, post NBA finals, he gets the adductor surgery or the core surgery that, knocks him out, ends up being the first 35 games of the regular season. And if you go back to that timeline, as you can remember, Sam, it was like maybe ready for the start of the regular season, 2 weeks evaluation, 2 weeks, they kept pushing it down the road. It really lingered. He eventually did come back post Christmas. And, even in his comments, after coming back was made it pretty clear he wasn't fully himself at that point. And he's been in and out of the lineup, but he's been playing lately, including which is like kind of an odd twist. All of this, like, they played the Warriors on Wednesday.
Right.
And he actually started because Josh Hart gets pulled off the court like 5 minutes before tip off, because he's just been traded to the Knicks. It's like, who's starting? Okay, Gary Payton is. It was the first time he'd played the Warriors. There was a lot of, like Jordan Poole talking post game about going against his former teammate. And then, fast forward to Thursday, they make this trade that we're talking about, this 4-teamer, which sends Sadiq Bey to Atlanta. They're, Detroit's obviously involved getting Wiseman. They get wrapped into this 4-team deal, and then Payton gets here. And because, in large part, their objective going into the deadline was to use James Wiseman to get a win now player. And then their medical team told them, the front office, the ownership group, he can't play now. You can't have, he isn't a win now player because he's going to be out. And now they're saying at least a month. They are reevaluating him a month from now, and they're hoping maybe pre-playoffs. But the problem for them right now is this isn't a Warriors of last season where they have a stable, position in the standings.
Yeah.
They're 9th right now, and the next month really matters. And they don't have Gary Payton, and then that obviously, I guess sparks them to go through this weekend saga that finally wraps up Sunday, right before the Super Bowl starts, where you kind of knew they were going to accept the trade, but it kind of seemed like it was like a protest wait. And also they have nudged the league to launch an investigation that I don't even know how long that's going to take.
So Bob Myers, like you said, addressed the media today. I saw the stuff you tweeted out about his comments. He's keeping it somewhat close to the vest for legal purposes, and he was pretty candid about that. Quick disclaimer, though, on this conversation, and this is not ideal, but that's all right. We'll make do. Gary is likely going to talk tonight, and we don't have that perspective just yet. So, that'll change part of this conversation. But let me throw it to you this way. There's a lot of layers to this situation. They're right out the gate. There was a perception that Gary had, been pushed by the Blazers to play, reporting on painkillers, which we now understand to be, Toradol pills that were taken to manage pain, as opposed to, and this is the Blazers' perspective, manage pain as opposed to, get out on the floor and push through. As the way it was kind of put to me is a loose parallel, I guess, is this was not like an old, any given Sunday scene where a guy's getting, shoved out on the field. That's what they are defensive about. But I don't think, I mean, the two sides don't agree on how this went down.
Clearly not, because Gary's playing, Wednesday, and then now the Warriors are like, he's out a month, and nothing happened in between. So,
right,
like it's two medical staffs clearly disagreeing. Again, as you mentioned, Bob even brought up HIPAA today. That's like, publicly, I think it's tough for them to get too much into the grittier details. But I mean, we don't need to get too much into it, Sam, and maybe Gary Payton will talk for himself later tonight. But there was some thorniness clearly behind the scenes with Gary in Portland this season and in his comeback, and that's part of the reason. Look, they signed him this offseason. They traded him by the deadline.
Do you feel, again, it's tough because he'll speak for himself, but in terms of him playing for the Blazers and when he did this year, what intel has come your way to this point regarding, like him, the difference between him wanting to be out there, choosing to be out there versus feeling some pressure to be out there?
Again, I would like for him to do his press conference tonight and kind of speak for himself, but it was indications are he was kind of being nudged, within this season. I mean, sure. And he was their big offseason signing. They gave him a 3-year deal. They pried him away from the defending champs. I think there was understandable pressure in this season for the Blazers, right? They have gone for this win now, Damian Lillard path, and their biggest offseason addition was struggling to get himself back on the court, and I brought this up to Bob Myers. Even when he was on the court, he did not look like himself. He only had 3 dunks all season,
right?
And that's part of why the question for the Warriors is how much did you press the Blazers on the fact of where was he at health wise? Bob's not getting into too much detail about that. He just mentioned the fact look, he played against us, started against us the night before, but Gary clearly wasn't himself.
You know what? I think you're making the right move, and let's not go too far down the Gary perspective. He'll speak for himself. But the one thing that does come to mind that is fair context for me, Slater, is that the Damian Lillard adductor injury is the same injury that Damian went through last year. And if you talk to him, it started long before then. And one thing I found so interesting about Damian's situation is that, when he came back this year and was a monster right out the gate, 30 plus almost every single night. I remember talking to him when he came through Sacramento about just his health and the idea that even at times when he had been on the floor last year, when he was trying to come back, that he was not the same guy. This is an incredibly slow injury to recover from. It seems like Gary had chosen again. He can speak to if he was nudged or not, but chosen to play through a certain level of pain. Chosen to play in spite of the fact that he knew he wasn't all the way back. And it just kind of begs the question, exactly how the Warriors saw it. Because, I mean, the dunking stat that you drop is pretty insightful, I think. That's a revelatory type of thing that'll tell you if a guy has his pop. But just, I guess, generally speaking, this injury is brutal to come back from.
Yeah. I from what I've gathered, there's a level of weakness that needs to be strengthened too, I think is part of it. And that's the Warriors now will take control of that situation, that rehab process, with at the same time that Steph Curry's kind of going through something similar. So right. It's and that the big thing here clearly is the Warriors just don't believe that they were given the proper information that this is what they were taking on. That they were basically taking on a month of Gary Payton in the second rehab. They thought they had a rotation player Saturday night. Right. And they just don't believe that the Blazers provided the requisite information, and we will see what the league thinks. You know what I mean? At least you presume you're going to have an unbiased jury here, or whatever you want to call it.
Right. To whatever degree you can, and let's attack this from another angle. Can you please try to pull the curtain back on the last couple of days from Joe Lacob on down? Joe, personality-wise, I can only imagine how pissed off he was, how frustrated he was. And, that's the stuff that we're not ever privy to seeing. But what have you heard about the reaction from the Warriors and the other component here being James Wiseman? You've got this young guy who gets drafted second overall and has just had, obstacle and hurdle and setback to his career, going back to the days in college in Memphis to his Warriors tenure. The idea of him coming back in the building, and having to get put through that kind of a thing was obviously just incredibly less than ideal. But, Joe and that whole group having to unpack all of that, how do you think that process went?
Yeah, it was, first of all, it was already a very tense deadline for them, right? They're having a disappointing season. Everyone kind of knows this 2 timeline clash that's going on. And The fact that the Wiseman had been DNPs, like healthy DNPs lately, and we all know that they invested the second overall pick, but also like Joe Lacob was a very vocal proponent of James Wiseman, still is a believer in James Wiseman long term, but had, I guess finally come to agree that it was, necessary to get off James Wiseman, despite Lacob's current belief that James Wiseman will still be a player, to help this team this season. And to do that, they decided to not, rope in a 4-team deal, which, by the way, could have got them Sadiq Bey if they wanted, but they wanted somebody they knew could plug and play into the system. So they went, flashback hunting basically, and got Gary Payton II. And part of Joe Lacob relinquishing Wiseman and the dream of James Wiseman, we can even call it, was right. Okay, fine. Gary Payton's going to be on the floor Saturday night against the Lakers, and let's go, chase down the 4 seed or something like that. And then Joe Lacob is told, no, he's actually going to miss, at least a month, perhaps, the rest of the regular season. And that is something that does not, make Joe Lacob very happy. And he is an outwardly emotional guy, we will say. And he was very much behind the scenes.
Emo, as the kids say.
he was talking directly to the league, from what I gather, and exploring all courses of action because they did it right at the deadline. There wasn't a way to amend or back out, or, I should say there was a way to back out. You fail the physical, but you walk James Wiseman back in the building. But from my understanding, even all the way up to Joe Lacob, there was an understanding like this would be not good for the Warriors to walk James Wiseman back in the building. And it also would not be good for James Wiseman. We could even get to that trade a little bit later, but it was clear James Wiseman needed a fresh start.
Sure.
And the Hawks are involved here too, right? They were doing some tax maneuvering, and they got Sadiq Bey and all these picks, and there was just so many parties involved that it just became clear to them they couldn't just completely undo the deal. So now they've gone down this road of like a formal complaint and see what that comes of it.
Although, quick shout out, John Hollander. I love John's coverage in general. John is always good for one punchline in every single column, and he killed him when he wrote.
I feel like you're underselling him.
At least one. You know that you're not going to waste your time reading the column because you're going to at least chuckle at some point. And John had a line about the deadline, and broadly speaking, the idea that it's a little silly that all these teams wait until the deadline to always make these moves, and there's an argument to be made that maybe everybody should move up the order of business a little bit because of nightmare scenarios like this one, where when you have to wait for the physical. If you do it at the deadline, then you're screwed. If something happens on the physical on the back end, and his line that he dropped was that, it's like a guy shopping for Christmas gifts at the Circle K on December 24th, and people looking at you like, bro, you knew the holiday was coming. Like you knew this was the date. And so, but that's the way the whole league functions. And we don't see stuff like this very often. Before we start making our way around the league, I do want you kind of alluded to it. Let's unpack the Wiseman Detroit side of this thing, man. Like the Pistons have obviously got this interesting young core, trying to build something out there and bet big on rising talents and hope that they strike with a couple of these players. This is like, analogous to or similar to the Marvin Bagley pickup, where, the Kings had not had any luck with their prize draft pick. And now Bagley goes out to Detroit. Wiseman out there. Just how do you see the rest of his career now that he's out from the Warriors' walls?
Well, it sounds like they're going to play him, which is step one for James Wiseman. Minutes, NBA minutes. Because he's in nearing the end of his third season, and he's played 60 NBA games. So like really, from experience wise, he's still like kind of in his rookie year. He missed 14 months with a meniscus tear that had kind of complications and swelling. And not only that, I mean, he was already considered one of the raw prospects that's come out in a long time, right? 3 college games, and he just needs to feel NBA basketball. He has these rare size, speed, at times touch, like tools, but it needs a lot of work to become an actual winning NBA player. You can look at all the numbers over his short career with the Warriors and how like basically every lineup he was in tanked. And then you could just use the eye test, like particularly him on the defensive end, the way that teams would exploit him. So I like that he's going to a losing team in a sense where, the last month and a half, 2 months for the Pistons, like if James Wiseman's on the floor and a team goes on an 11-2 run, Steve Kerr's calling timeout and getting James Wiseman out of the game. Dwayne Casey does not need to do that, right? They could lose by 30 tomorrow, but as long as James Wiseman gets good, 25 developmental minutes, that's great. So I like that aspect of it. I, in some ways, I would like to see him with Cade Cunningham maybe in the longer term when Cade's back next season. Now, the stranger part, though, is they're pretty stacked up in the front court. They drafted Jalen Durant, 19-year-old center who seems to be their center of the future. Isaiah Stewart's kind of starting at the 4, but he's kind of a 5-man too. And then what's kind of ironic a little bit considering former number 2 overall pick lefty big man Marvin Bagley, they traded for him at the deadline last year and then signed him to 3 years, $37 million. So he's still in the picture. So in some ways I like the fit for James Wiseman from a low stakes environment, but part of me doesn't, because unless he's just leaping those guys and he's suddenly become
it's crowded. Yeah, no, it's crowded. Well, and you wonder, the Bagley ripple effect is going to be part of this one way or the other. All right, let's go make the rounds. If I would have told you last week that we were going to spend the first 20 minutes of the post trade deadline pod talking about Gary Payton, I think you would have been wondering what the hell was going on.
Well, should I take host roles? Let me flip it to you.
Let's do it, brother.
I assume you're going to start in Phoenix, but what's your big?
I'll start wherever you want. We had fireworks. We got big names. We got plenty to get into.
Well, I want to start where you want to start. We did the first chunk on the Peyton deal. What is your biggest takeaway from the deadline?
My friend, I say let's start because you and I got a glimpse at this together in person. Let's start in the middle of the country. The Dallas Mavericks and the Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic pairing.
Yeah. We watched Mavericks Kings in Sacramento on Friday night, and then I actually didn't go to the Saturday night game when Luka and De'Aaron Fox debuted. But I will tell you, post game. So the Warriors are the 5:30 Warriors Lakers game on ABC. It ends. Post game gets done. The media room, whoever's left writing, there's probably 12 of us, watched the final 5 minutes of regulation and the overtime, and everyone that was a really good game Saturday night. Kings Mavericks,
really good game. Yeah. Honestly, it was a couple thoughts there. From an entertainment value standpoint, you know how crusty we get media wise. We it's hard to move the needle in terms of basketball enjoyment. You see some good ball, you enjoy it, but you see so much, you're a little bit numb to it. Kyrie, late in that game, late fourth quarter, when I think he dribbles right, spins left with Sabonis switched out on him, and a fadeaway, 12-footer off the glass. To keep the Mavs right there was the kind of Kyrie classic vintage incredible shot that reminded me how just absurdly talented this guy is. And on press row, it's been a long time since I saw a bunch of reporters react the way that they and we did, where everybody immediately jumping kind of to your left and right, looking at each other going, oh my God, that was absurd. And that's the Kyrie show, right? He's got that kind of box office value and talent. That was one of many nights that night that it was fun. It was fun to watch. He and Luka have to figure each other out. Who's going to shoot the last shot, things of that nature, the Kings.
So, yeah, that's where I wanted to go with it. And since you were there, I did want to ask you about that. It was crazy because it was the first game they played together, but it was a great peak already where Kyrie was the one that had it going late. But part of the reason the Kings end up winning the game is because they did go to Luka at times and for his slower isolation, he was getting the step back three more contested. And he's coming back from a pretty painful heel injury, it seems like. And didn't he admit post game it probably should have been Kyrie late?
He did, yeah, and that's the takeaway for the Mavs. Big picture is that all right, you lost the game, but it's a little bit like you lost the battle, you might win the war, because as far as their talking points and what they said afterwards, it was very healthy dialogue, if that makes sense. You had Kyrie saying, it's Luka, and that it was his read on that step back three that Luka missed. Big shot at the end of the game. And, Kyrie chose to give that last shot to Luka. Luka responds to that by saying that Kyrie was cooking and I should have found a way to get it back to him. So they both deferred publicly about this, who should have shot the ball. And I think they'll find their way. It's interesting, though. You can tell that they really don't have any relationship, almost no relationship. And, you add into that the fact that Luka by nature is just kind of known to be, he has fun when he plays on the practice court, shoot around game. He's a fairly light guy. He's intense when the game time comes, but he's not the biggest talker in terms of, talking through all of the team's issues. You talk to their coaches, and he's a little LeBron-esque when it comes to like, he's always listening, he's always seeing, his IQ is through the roof. But, it feels like with he and Kyrie, they're going to just have to feel their way through this situation together. It's not going to be, dinners at steakhouses talking about how we succeed and thrive and flourish as a team. It's going to have to be on feel, and we'll see where it goes. But, Luka was tired, like you kind of alluded to the injury aspect. He admitted afterwards that he was gassed, and the Kings squeak it out. But yeah, it was a fun little sneak for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know that them not having a relationship is a bad thing. Might even be a good thing, right? I mean, relationships with past teammates haven't necessarily, he's very friendly with Kevin Durant. That situation blew up.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and looking at it here, I was trying to remember the stat to your point about how Kyrie was hot and maybe he should have shot, all the big shots at the end. Luka didn't score in the fourth. He was 0 for 1 in the entire fourth quarter, and then, and that kind of shows you how gassed he was. And then in OT, he hits one shot, 2 points. And Kyrie was hot, and that's fine. I think next time Luka is going to know that, it's okay to give Kyrie that ball, but that dynamic real quickly it's going to be interesting. I watched a TV interview locally that was from one of the Dallas TV stations that I found online right after the trade. Right. And Mark Cuban was breaking it down, and it surprised me a little bit. He makes a comment on there where he says, listen, he was just analyzing the trade. He says, we already felt like we had the number one ball handler in basketball in Luka. Now we feel like we have the second best ball handler. And I've got to go, wait a minute now, like that you got to flip that. Like Kyrie is the best ball handler in the game, but it shows you that, no matter how you attack it, like the Mavs are going to remain a Luka-centric franchise. You know what I mean? This is Luka's team. Kyrie's got to find a way to fit in. It's a trial run for the next few months heading into free agency. And there's already all kinds of noise around the league where people feel like, if you're a betting man and you figure out what's going to happen here, that, there's probably more money on Kyrie going somewhere else this summer than there is on him staying. But a big part of that is how do they function together?
Yeah, I mean, you spent a couple of days around the Mavs in general, and just some of the thinkers around the Mavs. What's your feeling coming off that? Like, just on how they feel about the deal. I mean, it reeked of desperation, right?
Sure.
What do you?
I just think it's
good. It did look good early.
It looked good. I mean, there was some lighthearted comments, but there was truth in these comments about the timing of the trade. Like you talk about my whole speech about how teams should operate, earlier in trade season. Well, the Mavs would probably argue like that they went a little too early, because next thing you know, teams like the Suns countered with Kevin Durant and the West. Even the Clippers, Lakers doing what they did, like the West got better. Most of that action happened, not only after the Kyrie to Dallas trade, but, partly in response to, I think, where those dominoes started falling. So the timing was interesting because they had the headlines, they had the spotlight for a good minute early on. It looked like they were a new power in the West. And then the rest of the West said, hold my beer, and here we go. That was part of the conversation. And then they feel incredibly confident in their ability to partner with Kyrie from a human standpoint because of the relationships in their group. If you talk about Nico Harrison heading their front office, longtime former Nike executive who worked with Kyrie in the Nike space and has renowned relationships with star players, very close with Kyrie. That's a stark contrast to Kyrie's relationship with Sean Marks in Brooklyn. That's a big factor. Jason Kidd, and not only the friendship and partnership that he can have with Kyrie, but really from Kyrie's side, like the respect and kind of the way that he reveres Jason's career and is known to have been a big time fan of Jason's. So that part, managing the situation, make the most of it. They have a lot of confidence, and they don't seem too consumed with what happens in the summer. I think with a guy like Luka, where they know that you got to surround him with talent, they decided that, just like they had with Porzingis before, that this Dinwiddie kind of approach with Dorian Finney-Smith heading to Brooklyn, that, that was that had reached its kind of end, and they wanted to take a calculated risk with Kyrie.
let's move to the other, side of this coin where it did kind of trigger the Kevin Durant move to Phoenix, which they become the most interesting team in the league the rest of the season, it seems. And I've already seen, I saw the video of Kevin Durant walking out in that Suns, hoodie with the big Suns logo on his chest. It was somewhat of a jarring sight that, oh, this is really happening. Kevin Durant on the Suns. I mean, now at this point, we're talking about his fourth team, which covering him in Oklahoma City back in the day and how connected it seemed like he was to the Thunder. And then even that first season with the Warriors, I never would have predicted this, dominant run that would remain as far as a player goes, but kind of nomadically doing it, right, to his fourth team. A lot of times when you see NBA legends like Kevin Durant is, going team to team late in their career, it's like, oh, he's kind of you're seeing it with Russell Westbrook a little bit, right?
Right.
Like, oh, he's kind of lost it, and they keep trying with teams and it isn't working. It's like, no, everywhere he goes, he remains a top 5 player, but he's still going place to place to place, and it's just gonna be fascinating to see him in Phoenix.
I'm with you. I think it's gonna be fun, and I wrote the night of the trade that I was happy for Kevin. Don't normally get my feelings like that, but I do feel like a guy that talented, a guy that good, you see it with LeBron. We talk about, is LeBron wasting time in Lakerland, and he's still playing at such a high level. You just kind of hate seeing elite players who are in either non-competitive situations or dysfunctional situations. At the end of the day, with a lot of this stuff, you take away the drama and a lot of the stuff that we end up reporting on, talking about, like, it is about the basketball. And Kevin Durant is going to reach an age where he can't do the things that he can still do right now. And I would like to see him in a position to thrive and be at his best. I think that's a general sentiment that most people who enjoy the game would agree with. And so that Phoenix environment with a clean slate on the ownership front, with Matt Ishbia coming in, you talk about it is a whole different pod, but like the way Matt attacked trying to buy the Suns and was trying to buy teams all over the place, the Milwaukee Bucks, teams in other sports. Matt comes in incredibly ambitious, aggressive, wanting to be part of this sports world, and then waste no time swinging for the fences. And, the sense I got on his side was he comes in there, he learns pretty quickly that Durant is a possibility. He's kind of polling people kind of around the room, like, obviously trying to know what he doesn't know. He played the game a bit. He knows, a decent amount about basketball, but he wanted other opinions. Is this the right way to go? Liked what he heard, and he pulled the trigger on it. And what I love about it is I have a good feel for their group. And I do think personality wise, and style wise, I like it with Chris Paul and Devin Booker and even DeAndre Ayton, who we've had, they've had a roller coaster relationship with. I think DeAndre is probably going to lock in and play his role and just try to see what they can do this year. They're going to be dangerous. I don't know that I would make them my title favorite, but they're on the short list for sure and capable of winning the whole thing.
I think I would, to be honest. The Durant trade.
I just hate doing that when you it's so hard. You haven't seen it. Yeah. I mean, we've never seen Devin Booker have to adjust the way he's going to have to. And Chris Paul, Chris's play this year has been up and down at times. It's like, damn, he's leading the league in assists. Like,
how about the Chris Paul week where, the sliding doors moment for him? If Phoenix is in on the Kyrie deal, and he was been involved in that, and then maybe goes to Brooklyn and still Brooklyn blows it up, and then he, maybe we're talking about him as a buyout or something like that, where, this happens, and now, the closest he's ever been to a title is up 2-0 on the Bucks, but this is as
his window's not closed. Yeah.
As much as you could taste it if you're Chris Paul. The Durant trade drops Wednesday night, not on deadline day, right after Warriors Blazers had ended, and I'm in the Warriors locker room, and it is like spreading like wildfire. Like everyone in that Warriors locker room, like, can you believe this? No way. Like, for who? And it's funny, you mentioned Ishbia. Draymond Green,
Michigan State ties.
Had some opinions. Yeah, no, first thing he said, he's like, that's Michigan State. That's what we do at Michigan State. We get stuff done.
Wait a minute, is Draymond trying to take recruiting credit here somehow from another franchise?
He was just
Kevin Durant to the Suns.
He was shouting out. Yeah, right. He was shouting out his school, but then there was also definitely a realization in the room.
I told Kevin to go there.
part of the Warriors' optimism, despite their struggles this season, has been like, nobody in the West really scares us, right? Just
Right.
if we get it together. There was definitely more of a seriousness in the room of like,
Oh boy.
okay, we
Right.
might be dealing with something that we didn't think we are gonna have to deal with out West.
Well, I forget who tweeted this. I think it was a player, but somebody tweeted about, remember the John Morant quote about he said, "Nah, we fine in the West."
Yeah.
When he said that on ESPN, I think it was. Yeah. And someone said, "Man, all this because Josh had the nerve to say we fine in the West." Like the Grizzlies aren't fine in the West, and if they're not fine in the West, the Warriors damn sure aren't fine in the West. The slander that continues to come Denver's way, and I know, Slater, you're not a believer, but we cannot forget like Denver's still out there playing some pretty elite basketball and leading the conference. But the West all of a sudden is absolutely packed.
Denver just added Reggie Jackson in the buyout market.
Thomas Bryant, brother, come on now.
There you go. They didn't make a splash at the deadline. That was the other part of the deadline, and maybe we could shift to this a little bit, but the lack of like Toronto movement, Memphis not being able to, get an OG trade done, and suddenly like they're just kind of on nibbling on the fringes with Luke Kennard, and the Pelicans didn't juice up an upgrade, and then now you hear this news about Zion missing.
You're not a Josh Richardson believer for New Orleans?
Those are fringe moves.
Yes.
Fringe moves that don't move the needle. Durant moves the needle. Kyrie moves the needle. OG
would have moved the needle.
Would have moved the needle.
There
were some teams that just didn't move the needle.
No, I agree. The Toronto stuff was weird. I can't remember in recent history so much noise on the front office level about a team like Toronto that had so many good players that other teams were hoping would be available. And then us thinking that it must be a smokescreen, at least in terms of some of these guys. Like surely they have to move OG. And he was the one people focused on because he's kind of widely known not to be ecstatic with his role. And it was made clear to me like he could be fine in Toronto from a happiness level, but he's definitely on the lookout for a bigger role. So, a lot of times when those are the dynamics, then a team just, decides to move off that guy. That didn't happen, even though the market seems to have been really robust. It seemed like Memphis went after him really hard. New Orleans as well, I believe.
Warriors were
in on that too. Yeah. So that was the biggest surprise. Pascal, it's funny because these things are intersecting. Like the Pascal OG on court fit is, I think, one of the reasons that people thought that they would, and they didn't. And both those guys have incredibly robust markets around the league, but they kind of stand pat. So that was a surprise. In our backyard, because we end up inevitably talking about the old Beam team in Sacramento, they don't end up doing much of anything, but I did learn a little on the back end about some of the stuff they were getting into. Their biggest disappointment, if you will, I think, was they were pretty locked in on the Vanderbilt possibility. And when that 4-team deal, the Westbrook trade, was coming together, I think there was some hope that it was going to fall apart on the Minnesota side with Mike Conley going to the Wolves, and that they would pick up, kind of the scraps from there. I think they had a couple of seconds out for Vanderbilt, thought he would fit really well. That didn't happen. Matisse Thybulle didn't happen with them. So one of those teams that didn't end up doing anything big.
Let's throw it to an ad break, Mr. Amick, before we finish the rest of the pod.
Let's do it. What are we hitting on the other side of the pod, though? We got to do the old teaser.
Yeah, I mean, what? You want to do a couple mini trades, maybe talk a little of like any buyout candidates that interest you, the Russell Westbrook situation? I would ask you, what do you still want to talk about with this player movement week?
I mean, Fred Katz is not with us on this week's pod. And so in true, giving Fred Katz a hard time fashion, I think we got to talk Russell Westbrook and Lakers, but also, where Russ might go next. I think that's worth getting into. And our guy, Darnell Mayberry, covering the Bulls, wrote a good piece about that today. So we will do that on the other side.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Indeed. Visit Indeed.com/NBA Show 22 to start hiring now. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. If you hate waiting, Indeed's US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/NBA Show 22 to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/NBA Show 22. Indeed.com/NBA Show 22. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
All right, Slater, we back. It's not a tampering pod unless we somehow, some way, find a way to talk about the LA Lakers. I was in LA last week, and the fatigue you might hear in my voice is it's been a minute since I went to 4 consecutive games. It was a back-to-back to back-to-back. So we go Mavs, Clippers, Lakers, Bucks, then up the coast to Mavs, Kings. But those first 2 games, looking at the Lakers right after LeBron, of course, breaks the all-time scoring record, the new pieces from their trades had not been to town yet. And so you're kind of just trying to get eyes on what the Lakers look like. But the key thing, of course, as far as their season to this point, is no more Russell Westbrook. They send him to Utah in that deal, still, I think, expected to be bought out, even though the Jazz have said that they, they're keeping their options open and both sides were still talking. But the Westbrook ending in Lakerland that myself and Jovan Buha wrote a lot about a couple days back, just a really, really tough chapter for Russ, a guy that's had an incredible career. And there's part of me that says he made a lot of mistakes in his time there. It's also part of me that says, he was scapegoated for parts of his time there. And in the end, it got pretty uncomfortable. And again, we wrote all about that. And now we'll see what he does, because he's a guy who I believe he's 34. Does that sound right?
Yes, that sounds correct.
Yeah, and it's a vet a la Carmelo Anthony who has got to figure out if he can extend his career and still be an impact player. And whether it's Chicago, the Clippers, the Heat, what are your thoughts on what Russ should be looking at here?
Yeah, the Chicago and the Clippers aspect you're linking him to his more glory days and people he was connected to, which is Paul George, who has publicly advocated, which you very rarely see, right? For Russell Westbrook, and then Billy Donovan in Chicago. And, you mentioned Darnell, writing a story about that. Darnell also covered Russell Westbrook in Oklahoma City. He knows that connection. The Miami one, you don't have a former coach or player necessarily, but like Miami's environment does seem very Russell Westbrook-y, right? I mean, he keeps himself in elite shape. He's like OCD on his like preparedness for games. And I feel like him and Pat Riley, might butt heads, but also love each other. You know how like a lot of the players that succeed in the Heat environment, even Jimmy Butler, we could say, who has succeeded in his Heat career, like he has his dust ups with Spoelstra and Riley even, but it's like, it's out of like, tenacity of competition. And Russell Westbrook's mindset fits what Miami is about. Now, is Russell Westbrook, can he help them on the court? I don't know, but Kyle Lowry's been a disappointment, and they do need help. Like they seem like they're spinning their tires a little bit. So I like Miami as an option. I like Chicago just because, again, like they kind of need a jolt to life. I'm not saying Westbrook will definitely give it to them, but it's at least worth a shot at a minimum prorated deal. Whereas the Clippers, I don't like the fit personally.
I couldn't agree more. I know it's, more fun for podcast purposes to have vehement disagreements, but I think I'm in agreement with you, brother. Like the Clippers one, they have too much invested in the Kawhi Leonard, Paul George driven approach to add in a new, player of this magnitude, this personality, this profile.
In LA too, right? Down the hallway, which
in LA, man, he's going to be in his feelings about how the Lakers chapter ended. The media, I mean, even the media components later, like you're going to be looking at a lot of the same faces who go to Clippers games and Lakers games. You don't get the clean cut from that chapter. You're going to, have hard feelings left over that are, I think, a little more fresh, because guess what? You're still playing inside crypto.com arena. The Chicago one, you unpacked the Heat one really well. And I do agree, like Heat culture, in a lot of ways is got a lot of kind of common threads with Russell Westbrook culture. Pat Riley, more than anybody in the league, feels like, give him a 800-pound giant, he can tame it. You know what I mean? That's kind of how he's wired, because he thinks he can connect with guys on a championship level. I would enjoy seeing that. The Bulls one, though, and I was around like you were, the Thunder chapter with Billy Donovan and Russell Westbrook. It's a really good partnership. You know what I mean? Like a really, really strong connection between those
it's
guys.
funny. Both of his Thunder coaches, Donovan and Scott Brooks.
Yeah.
He's connected.
And genuine, and not to like, kind of, he spill the tea like we sometimes do, but like sometimes coaches, they're saying one thing publicly and then we get them privately and it's a totally different story. You know what I mean? That was not the case with Billy and Russ. Like, you talked to Billy privately and he was just blown away by Russ's work ethic, blown away by his intensity. And Billy is one of those guys that like has very little tolerance for not competing every minute, on the floor, on both ends of the floor. And Russ set the tone for their team. And of course, that MVP season where he was carrying them and really
the Now I Do What I Want season. Now I do what I want. Remember when he came out with that song post Durant? Now I do what I want. And he
probably shouldn't be the anthem in Chicago if he goes there.
Oh, now I do what I want. Oh man.
But these Bulls, you talked earlier about like the Mavs doing the Kyrie deal partly based on desperation. The Bulls are desperate because they're another team that didn't blow things up at the deadline like Toronto. They're another team with stars in Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan who are not fitting all that well like they had in the beginning of their time together. Rumblings about maybe Zach being on the move. I mean, he was tied to the Lakers heading into the trade deadline, partly because he's a clutch client like LeBron and AD. But, a lot of angst with the Bulls situation. And if you're not going to blow it up, then you might as well, try to salvage it, because, the calculus should be, again, in Westbrook style, why not? What do we have to lose? And the Bulls, in my opinion, right now, don't have much to lose because they don't have momentum. They don't have growth. They have regression, and they have a very short timeline to where maybe this summer, at some point in the near future, they're probably going to have to make these tough calls and move on from some of these people. I mean, what better way to take one last flyer on a guy who might be a game changer in Russ, because you have Lonzo Ball out, you have a void, and I'm stealing some of this from Darnell's column. You have a void in leadership qualities, a void in intensity, a team that is playing lackluster basketball too often, so you might not have the prettiest version of the game when Russ is out there, but you're going to have the intensity and some of those things that they're missing.
Yeah, and one of the problems with the Russell Westbrook experience in LA was the contract, and which, because of what a big salary piece he was for 44 million, something like that. That comes with the level of stature in the locker room and importance to solve the problems that are going on. Whereas he now, if he does get bought out by Utah and even probably moving forward the next few seasons, he's probably going to be a minimum guy in the buyout market. Maybe he can play his way into, mid-level type money, but like from here on out in his career, he's much lower salary, which means much lower stakes if you bring him in, because if it's not working, you can just send him away, and it's really not that big of a penalty. So that should, you would think, motivate him to make it work more than maybe it had been. Like the
not
Lakers,
to mention like just the humans part of this, Slater, is like we all like how you came into a certain group is always gonna form and shape how you move within that group. Meaning, he didn't forget that like when he came to the Lakers a couple summers ago that he was getting wined and dined by LeBron James and Anthony Davis and like part of these kind of off-season superstar recruitment meetings where he was treated like the all-time great that he is. And then when it went south, and I think relatively quickly, he started getting the kind of, second tier treatment and treated again like he was the problem, and the fans and the media were tough on him. This would be wholly different. This would be, like you said, coming in with a much different, salary scale, much different clout scale, but I think it could be good because those guys, my experience with DeRozan, to a lesser degree, Levine, you hear good things about Zach. I think they're personality wise the kind of guys that are going to show him respect, let him have his space and let him have his role if they go that route and do something with him. And I think it could be interesting. And again, like, what do they got to lose? Like, they're not scaring anybody right now.
I agree. I just wanted to make it quick since we mentioned it in the podcast. Now it sounds like Gary Payton II will not talk tonight. Steph Curry is actually going to talk tonight pregame. So just wanted to note that.
The analysis holds up. Let's finish on this. What other moves? There were a bunch of them, but in terms of game-changing impact moves, even if they're not star names, which ones might have gotten your attention?
I was at the Lakers' first game, and no LeBron doesn't play. Davis, like Anthony Davis, protected the rim well in the fourth quarter, but generally did not have a good offensive night. And the Lakers beat the Warriors in a game that the Warriors at home were really going for. Obviously didn't have Steph, but I just, Jared Vanderbilt provided some good energy off the bench. Malik Beasley can shoot it. D'Angelo Russell played a controlled, efficient game. And I know I read some of what Jovan has written about it, but was like working the pick and roll with Davis, pretty well. And that's an upgrade from that just downhill Russell Westbrook, like, hunting the rim at all times, or even Patrick Beverly, who's like obviously not an offensive threat. And it's just, the mix is very much different for the Lakers. And it was one game, no LeBron, but you can just see like, okay, this is the last mix didn't work. I have no idea if this one will, but I'd say the first taste of it was slightly encouraging.
No, I can buy that. I mean, the Russell one is funny to me, man. Like I can't remember a guy who, sometimes we play that game on social media, whatever, where you post stats and you don't attach the name to the stats, and then you just try to see if people can figure out who that is. Like, if you post D'Angelo Russell stats the past couple of months, you'd have most of the league coming to try to get this dude. You know what I mean? Then you add the name, which comes with some of the history, some of the inconsistency, some of the personality, where, questions about just kind of the way he moves. And because when that deal went down, and I was at, the Lakers game when it went down, or Clippers game rather, I'm sorry. Like, basketball people's reaction was, Vanderbilt, cool, good for the Lakers. Beasley, cool, good for the Lakers. Russell, oh no. Like, and again, that's a little surprising because you're comparing him in terms of the pieces here to Russ. Like, really? Like, it's not an upgrade? Like, D'Angelo's been playing well, but there's still, reputation wise, he's got work to do as far as how he's perceived. But if it continues like it did in that Warriors game, I could see that being an okay fit. I mean, he's a, far, far better shooter than Westbrook is. And, he knows the organization, which doesn't matter that much, but I do think that personal tie and that history of D'Angelo having been drafted there, coming back, seemingly a little older, a little wiser, is those things are not bad, outside factors to consider. I think,
and they can get off him this summer. This could just, like, if it's not working, be a 1.5 month thing. And then,
well, we could do a whole pot on this, but I do think they, in terms of Lakers planning, Lakers future, Rob Pelinka did a really nice job of effectively improving the team now, also showing LeBron James that he did some good work and he's not sitting on his hands, and he's willing to put the 2 first-rounders out there like they did in the Kyrie trade talks. And so it cut into some of that stuff that I've written about and talked to LeBron about, that the Lakers weren't willing to really go for it. But it also, based on the guys they got, they still have a ton of flexibility this summer to either reinvest in some of the new guys and go that route where you're adding depth and role players, or they can still pivot and go the star route based on their cap situation. And those are decisions for another day. But I mean, they'll be interesting down the stretch. I mean, LeBron missing the first 2 games post trade deadline is not great with his foot injury. So, their odds of actually making noise here are getting lessening by the day. But I did like what they did.
Yeah. And if we look across the league, I mean, there's not a ton of other ones that you feel like shook up title teams. I mean, Jay Crowder to Milwaukee, like that. I'm curious how Jay Crowder looks. He hasn't played in so long.
They felt good about it. I talked to the Bucks about that. I mean, they worked him out, I think, a couple times. They for what it's worth, they felt good. They obviously felt good. They did the deal. The Bucks, to me,
how funny is that, by the way, that like Jay Crowder's just working out for the Bucks in Milwaukee, and like clearly has been, he's been allowed to talk to the Bucks, but he is working out for the Bucks while he is being traded from the Suns to the Nets. Like,
right.
Like,
This
go
league.
ahead.
No, just he's a veteran piece where they need, another versatile wing defender to help them with the Jason Tatums and the Jaylen Browns of the world when the playoffs come around. A guy who, it's funny, how teams a lot of times get their judgment colored by specific games a guy might have against them or specific series. And so despite the fact that Jay was obviously part of that Suns Bucks finals, it sounds like that the Bucks series against Miami in the bubble was the more impactful one in terms of his reputation and how the Bucks saw Jay, that, the work he did, in that series on Giannis and the rest of the team was kind of the lasting memory that had something to do with the way they saw the possibility of getting him. So they feel good about that. And I think we still are, we are in the media guilty of focusing on the shiny objects, the stars. And I mean, I joked about Denver before and how I do think they're very good and actual title contenders. Milwaukee, I'm going to keep saying it. Like we keep overlooking them because Boston has been out front all year from a record standpoint, and they're the team that was in the finals last. But having just seen the Bucks in that win over the Clippers, and I think they're at 10 in a row now. Giannis just playing his tail off, and Chris Middleton looking like Chris Middleton again. Now getting the Crowder addition. They got a lot going for him, and to me, you're absolutely on that short list.
Yep. Anything else? I mean, Celtics, they got Mike Muscala like for big man depth, but didn't do anything that's significant.
No, I like the Muscala move. I mean, more shooting is not a bad thing. I saw some surprise, and this is Andrew Schleck special, but like, and the Thunder's willingness to part ways with Mike since they've actually been winning games lately. So I think
got
he
Dario
helps
Saric in there, who I thought might have been a buyout candidate, but it sounds like Dario Saric is going to be in the Mike Muscala role, almost, you could say, as like kind of the veteran backup big. Got him for Darius Baisley, who goes to the Suns.
There you go. No, probably my last thoughts later, and I'll let you get out of here. But on the Wolves, it's a subtle move, but I like the Mike Conley addition to Minnesota. I'm just really curious to see if that helps Rudy Gobert's comfort level. And it's a weird landscape because it's, they started this thing with new ownership, Mark Lore and Alex Rodriguez kind of transitioning in with the idea that at first that this is Karl Anthony Towns' franchise. And then pretty quickly it was like, oh, okay, hold on. It's Anthony Edwards' franchise. And Karl's still a big part of it. But now we're going to trade for Rudy. But now you have an addition of somebody like Mike Conley, who played with Rudy in Utah, knows him well, plays extremely effective pick and roll basketball with him, knows how to throw perfect lobs, just knows how to play with Rudy. It shows the degree to which they're invested in making this thing with Rudy work. And for trade purposes, what I thought was so interesting about the trade talks that led to that deal was that idea that near the end, and this, like Minnesota seemed like they were contemplating at the end if they wanted to do it, pushing for more draft capital. And it made me laugh a little bit because it was like the rest of the league is well aware that for the purposes of the Timberwolves, Mike Conley's value was higher than it was for anybody else. He's a little bit of an X factor because they have Rudy. And it was almost as if the Timberwolves were hoping that people had forgotten that and would throw in an extra couple of seconds, just to make it worth their while. But like
the continued ramifications of what you would categorize as a bad deal, right? I mean, we saw it with Russell Westbrook situation in LA, but right, the domino effects of a bigger picture move that you make that doesn't work early on is like, response moves in the league, understanding why, what your motives are within these moves.
100%. But I do think Mike is going to help them and quietly, with Towns out for quite some time now, they have been keeping their head above water as we do this pod. They're 30-29. They're a game out of the 6th spot. So Minnesota's still fighting. The West is still just absurdly level from a parity standpoint. And, that might change once Mr. Durant gets back. But fun stuff, man. It was a good deadline.
Yeah, it was. A lot of moves.
A lot of moves. All right, everybody. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening as always. We'll be back next week as we get a little closer to the playoffs later. They're coming.